Our next speaker is Darren Sharp. Darren wears many hats. He's the editor of Shareable. He's the director of Social Surplus, and he's writing a book on sharing cities to be published in mid this year. Yeah. Today, Darren will share his ideas on how cooperative ownership of sharing platforms can create social, economic and environmental returns for our cities, our regions and our communities. Please join me in welcoming Darren Sharp to the stage. Thank you.
Thanks so much for that warm introduction, Gail, and thank you so much to Todd and Maria for inviting me over here today and to the South Australian Government. It's clear that the sharing economy provides exciting opportunities to leverage a range of public and private assets in new ways. Governments have an increasingly important role to play in making sure the benefits of the sharing economy are distributed towards and directed towards public good outcomes that strengthen communities. Today I'll be really talking about how cities are key drivers of making this happen as platforms for sharing public assets and infrastructure to create social, economic and environmental returns. So yeah, just a little bit about me. I am the Director of Social Surplus, work with governments and other public sector organisations to activate local sharing communities around the country. I'm also the Aussie editor of Shareable, and I'm doing a PhD on urban experiments for sustainability transitions funded by the CRC for Low Carbon Living through Curtin University in Perth. So, the reason why cities are important, I talk about the 21st century as the make it or break it century. There's so many challenges that we're facing really as a species, as a civilization, everything from population growth and rising inequality and climate change, massive migration issues, housing affordability issues, and so on. Cities are where it's at. We experience these challenges at a local level, at a city level. We've had the highest level of migration from regions and towns into urban areas in human history, projected to have 50% of the population, currently have 50% of the population living in cities globally, projected to have something closer to 75% of the population living in cities by mid-century, which is mind-boggling. So we have to develop solutions to these challenges at the city level. And I think it's important to look at our cities as platforms for sharing. And we can look at this and frame this in a variety of different ways. If we think about maybe some of the contrast between proprietary software and open source software, whereas proprietary software is somewhat a black box and difficult to get into the algorithms and the data behind what's going on there. If we think about our cities as open platforms for sharing in terms of having the city as an urban commons or the city as a commons, we can look at how do we leverage all these things to drive innovation and greater engagement with citizens, everything from open data to citizen juries and participatory budgeting, urban prototyping and placemaking, using human-centered design. So I think it's important to look at how we can strengthen our cities as platforms for sharing, using open design, using open code, open innovation and open software, amongst other things. So I've already heard, what the sharing economy is from Brent and Ingrid earlier. I won't spend too much time on this. It's clearly a new story for a new economy. It's about unlocking the idling capacity of stuff, space and skills. Peers are exchanging a variety of surplus assets, increasingly moving into pretty much everything over the coming years, including energy. Things like blockchain technology are allowing people to even share energy generated on their solar rooftop PVC and so on, which is fascinating. So there's just ongoing disruption. Different business models. People are not just sharing, they're renting, they're lending, they're swapping, they're bartering, they're gifting, and ultimately it's about matching needs with haves. Some key themes, access over ownership's obviously a big one. You can, rent or you actually get access to a free bike through Bike SA, I believe. When you come to Adelaide, you can go co-work at a variety of co-working spaces. You don't have to own an office anymore. You can go work at Hub Adelaide or, many of the other spaces that are out there. You can go and get access to a share car through GoGet, who we're going to be hearing from shortly as well. So access over ownership is really a key theme. So is unlocking the idling capacity of, a variety of assets. Cities are getting involved in this. If we look at what Seoul are doing, Sharing City Seoul have opened up over 800 of their public buildings for use during idle hours. Cohilo is a platform which enables hospitals to rent out and use medical equipment, often quite expensive medical equipment, throughout their partner networks and so on, so that equipment can be used by people who need that technology. And then at the social enterprise level, we see groups like 3,000 Acres in Melbourne unlocking vacant land to use for food growing and urban agriculture, which is another really fascinating way of using an idle asset. It's also about optimising surplus. It could be stuff, so a variety of clothing exchanges exist. Streetbank is a UK social enterprise that's been around for about a decade. You can offload goods that you've got, whether it's like a old bit of furniture or some crockery or books or whatever it might be, and share those with your neighbours and basically prevent that stuff from going into landfill. Tool libraries are popping up all over the place. There's Peachy Place Tool Library here. We've got Brunswick Tool Library in Melbourne. I'd love to see more and more tool libraries in every sort of suburb and city around the place. Space, obviously, we've just heard from Airbnb. People can also rent out their driveways. They can provide access to their garages for storage facilities. Home Share Australia, New Zealand, they match older people who want to stay in their homes with usually students who can live rent-free by providing a few hours of labour. Room exchanges, we're going to hear from later on, are doing something similar as well. And again, on the intangible side of things, in terms of intangible assets, it's really important to remember that, beyond the errand marketplaces that we know of with, Airtasker and so on, there's a variety of other service exchanges like Nebos, which is in Melbourne, that enables freelancers to actually barter their skills using their own alternative currency, so they're not using cash to do that. Peer Academy is a peer-to-peer knowledge sharing platform for the public sector, which is one to have a look at as well. So optimising surplus assets is another key theme. And I think what often gets overlooked in all of this is the fact that community sharing, predates so much of the technology-centric sharing economy and collaborative economy that we hear about, and that gets the sort of lion's share of the attention. But every day and every weekend at farmers markets, people are doing food swaps. People are going to toy libraries. Parents are going to toy libraries, and good old-fashioned book lending libraries to get access to a variety of media and so on. They're part of the sharing economy as well. Men's sheds are enabling men to keep their skills in shape and tackle depression and isolation through woodwork and through other sort of forms of skill sharing. And community gardens and urban agriculture are massive in cities around Australia and more broadly. And repair cafes are happening again every weekend in over 1,000 cities around the world, where people come together and have a broken appliance or broken clothing or textiles, whatever it might be, and they can get them fixed by a peer for free, and they'll actually then learn how to repair that good themselves later on. So there's a skill acquisition going on there as well, beyond just the repair in itself. What's clear though is that the benefits of the sharing economy are unevenly distributed. If we have a look at some emerging trends that are actually happening, we can see that people are taking that ethos of community sharing, actually applying it to community ownership of platforms. So, if we actually think about a lot of the platforms in the sharing economy that we've talked about as being on-demand service exchanges, they're actually, whether it's Uber or Deliveroo or Airtasker and others and so on, they're actually becoming labour brokerages. And this is shifting a lot of the risk onto independent contractors and so on, who are looking at alternative ways to protect their livelihoods and strengthen their own side of the bargain, as it were. And so they're actually applying cooperative principles to digital platforms through something called platform cooperatives. And this is any kind of digital platform that is cooperatively owned by the people who are creating the value in that ecosystem. So it could be something like Stocks United, which is a stock photography business in Canada. They're a member-owned co-op, and 50% of revenues go towards the photographers, the creatives themselves. It could be a whole bunch of ride-sharing or taxi cooperatives like Green Taxi Cooperative in Colorado or Ride Austin in Texas. They have actually got together a whole bunch of either ex-Uber drivers or taxi drivers and created their own ride-hailing apps and formed those as worker-owned cooperatives. So they're actually keeping profits and they're keeping decision-making in the hands of local communities through democratic ownership and governance of these platforms. And we're starting to see experiments like that happening closer to home here as well. So if we look at things like Beehive Bendigo, this is something that's in my neck of the woods just outside of Melbourne. Bendigo is a community of about 100,000 people. They are actually going to become Australia's first platform cooperative, and they are developing the technology. They've just launched, they've raised over $30,000 already. They've got strong support from their local community to actually have their own versions of transport, food, stuff, skills, time sharing and so on that's going to be democratically owned and democratically run by the people of Bendigo, and they're going to direct 5% of their spend towards local, social and environmental causes. So that begs the question, if we come back to cities, what if we apply a sharing mindset to our cities to create more economic value, more social value and more environmental value? What does that look like? And that brings us to sharing cities, which is something that I've been involved in for a number of years now through my work at Shareable and the Sharing Cities Network. And sharing cities are really about focusing on citizen-centric solutions that increase the sharing capacity of existing assets and infrastructure. This could be everything from underutilised buildings, vacant land, public spaces, strengthening citizen engagement through things like participatory budgeting and citizen juries and so on, which I know are underway here in South Australia, which is fantastic. It's about urban green space and so on. It's about looking at the city as not just a platform for sharing, but also as an urban commons, where these resources are held in common by the community and provide a huge amount of creativity and innovation. If you think about what makes my hometown really tick, it's the laneways and the street culture and the cafe scene and the graffiti and so on. Those are all urban commons. People can access those spaces collectively and freely and innovate and experiment and prototype new solutions to the challenges that we face as an urban population. And cities are moving into a really strategic role as a facilitator of these shifts through a range of different policies and programs and services to address transportation, housing, food and the future of work, and to try and embed questions of social justice, of equity and inclusion for citizens and residents, and have a collaborative approach to how the sharing economy looks in each and every city. And at Shareable we put out a policy primer for shareable cities a number of years ago, and we also launched the Sharing Cities Network back in 2013, and there are over 50 cities now that are involved in that network, and we run a whole bunch of asset mapping workshops called Map Jams to really try and put local sharing initiatives, especially community-based sharing initiatives, on the map. And we run sharing festivals in cities around the world to try and introduce sharing to communities and demonstrate the benefits of food sharing, meal sharing, cooperative, social enterprise, a whole range of different models that often don't get grab all the headlines, but which bring a lot of benefits to communities in terms of strengthening opportunities for local economic development and self-provisioning. And we're seeing cities actually starting to embrace this wholeheartedly and developing programs and services. And the three I just want to look at briefly today are Seoul, Amsterdam and Bologna. And Seoul really are at the forefront as the world's first sharing city, which they launched back in 2012. And that was out of the Mayor's office. The Mayor's got a social innovation background, and in Seoul they face a particularly unique set of challenges as one of the world's most highly advanced technological cities. They also have huge amounts of addiction to the internet and to gaming, and a huge amount of depression and social isolation and a whole bunch of other things. But they've also got a very strong, familial culture and strong community connections as well. So the city government, the city of Seoul, are actually looking at how can they leverage the sharing economy to strengthen the social fabric and create new forms of value for their community. So they created this Metropolitan Government Act for promoting sharing. They have a really great open data program. As I mentioned earlier, they have over 800 public buildings for use by the community during idle hours. And you can imagine if you're a startup or a social entrepreneur or a co-op or a social enterprise or whatever it might be, and you need access to space for meetings, or even if you're a community group or association, it's really hard to get access to space in cities. And so getting access to any kind of building, meeting room, workspace, makerspace is really key to be able to actually bootstrap and get to the next stage of your enterprise's development. And to that effect as well, they help with capacity building. They run a startup school to train the next generation of sharing economy entrepreneurs, and they're trying to really strengthen a local domestic sharing ecosystem. So they've got their own versions of clothes sharing, of transportation sharing, of home sharing, of food sharing, and a whole range of different enterprises and organisations. And they have a designated sharing enterprise program, and they promote their sharing enterprises, the government does, to the community, and try to raise the general level of literacy in the community around the benefits of sharing. So you can see there they've invested over $6 million in over 70 sharing organisations, and the buildings that they've opened up have been accessed over 20,000 times as well. Again, as mentioned at the start, I've been part of a team writing a book on sharing cities, which is due out in the middle of this year, with chapters on housing, food, transport, work, the urban commons, and so on. And we've got really compelling case studies from all around the world. We spent the past year putting this work together and modelled policies, importantly, for local government to see how others have succeeded in this space and what they've done to give people inspiration to make the adaptations and tweaks they need to their own local situations, and see and be inspired by the work of other cities around the world. So some client engagements, just to give you a taste of the work that I do. It's really about amplifying the strengths of people and communities, and that's really through 5 stages of initially appreciating strengths of our community. So I have a community-first approach at Social Surplus, using methodologies like appreciative inquiry and asset-based community development, looking at people's, not just their physical assets, their homes and cars and so on, but their skills, their intangible assets, which are really key to all of this, and trying to focus on building those up from the ground level up, working with city government, partnering with community groups and so on to develop programs for sharing that can deliver public good outcomes. Then it's about asset mapping. So how do we get all these services out there in a public, very visible way? And I'll give you some examples of that. It's about creating the vision. It's about prototyping these experiments and doing that in a co-designed way with the community. And then it's about piloting and testing to see how we can succeed at this. And so these are some examples here. This is a project that I've been working on with the city of Boroondara, which is in the inner east of Melbourne. Basically that's a very affluent area. If you're familiar with Melbourne and all, it's sort of like Hawthorn, Camberwell, green, leafy eastern suburbs. It's got the highest levels of single occupancy dwellings in the country, some of the highest levels. And to that effect, they've got very high, very large issues with social isolation, with depression, mobility, and access to services. People have trouble getting around, older people. What Boroondara did was they became part of the World Health Organisation's age-friendly city framework. So they're looking at how can they strengthen their older residents to get access to a range of services and to live fulfilling lives. And so they were one of the first test sites for a meal sharing platform called Casserole Club, which is from the UK, and that matches older people in the community with cooks who are happy to provide them, which are just their neighbours basically, who are happy to provide them an extra meal, and they come along like once every week or two and they'll spend a couple of hours with them. So they're using food as a social object to overcome isolation. It's a free service to the community. It's auspiced by local government who provide support in terms of officers who can oversee that program. And FutureGov, who developed the software, provide that as a service, so you can subscribe to that platform. And it's a matchmaking service ultimately. So we're looking at how can we leverage those types of interactions which are already going on through food swaps, through meal sharing, through community gardens, through home sharing. Home Share Australia and New Zealand are also operating in Boroondara. And so to that effect, we ran an age-friendly forum back in 2015 and brought a number of community stakeholders together, including residents, including Rotary Club and so on. And we went through and did that appreciative exercise, looking at the strengths of Boroondara residents, of their older residents, looking at the opportunities to get them to participate in the sharing economy, especially community-based sharing, through the intangible assets that they have, the gifts of the head, what do they know about, gifts of the heart, what are they passionate about, and gifts of the hands, what can they make or create together, which community groups are out there, which institutions can they be connected up with, businesses, and then a range of other assets, and also local, how do we play to the local identity and heritage and culture of the area as well. And so out of that, we developed a community sharing strategy for Boroondara. And in addition, I completed a toolkit to help community groups put together their own community sharing projects. On the asset mapping front, this is an example from City of Yarra, again in north of Melbourne, just north of the CBD, suburbs like Richmond and parts of Carlton and Fitzroy, quite a diverse community. Very green community. It's in the federal seat of Adam Bant, the only Greens member in the House of Representatives, that community is very concerned about green issues and sustainability issues. So one action that came out of their environment strategy was a concern in the community around questions of sustainable consumption. So I worked with the City of Yarra and other partners to run what we call a map jam, an asset mapping workshop with the community, and we basically started the process of mapping all of the sharing services that exist in Yarra. And it's an ongoing process. It provides a public directory though. It makes the invisible visible. It helps to connect the dots and create an enabling environment within that community so that you're actually bringing sharing startups together with community groups, together with people running clothing exchanges, car sharing, a whole range of sharing, together with local government stakeholders so they can have a conversation and start to collaborate together on policy, on services, on programs and so on. And so you can see the map there and some of the services that we mapped using a platform called OpenStreetMap. This is an example of visioning and prototyping, which was a project that I led with my colleague, Dr. Jose Ramos, for the City of Melbourne. Last year, they had Future Melbourne 2026, which was a collaborative planning process to basically develop the city's 10-year plan. We ran a series of workshops at Town Hall looking at how Melbourne's future economy will change over the coming decade. And it was, including everything beyond just sharing around the maker movement, around distributed manufacturing, around things like blockchain and energy sharing and so on, trying to get a sense of, the future of work, rising inequality, automation, what is this going to look like in 10 years' time? And so we ran an appreciative inquiry process where we collectively, as a group, which included members of the community, it included other city stakeholders, people from the Treasury building, from Lend-Lease, from a whole range of other city stakeholders that were there. We came together shoulder to shoulder and developed a way to understand the strengths of Melbourne's economy going forward. We then developed a vision for Melbourne's economy, and this is a vision mapping process that we developed for this actual exercise, and we started plotting in a geospatially rich way the visions for Melbourne's future economy on that map, which you can see there. And then in the second workshop, we went into a co-design process where we co-designed with those community stakeholders prototypes for Melbourne's economy. And this included everything from a goodwill exchange, which was an idea to have an exchange within Town Hall that could bring social entrepreneurs together with experienced business people and so on, to provide mentoring and matchmaking around skills so that those early stage entrepreneurs could get access to advice at that crucial period of their development. It included a plan to open up access to underutilised space around train stations and so on in the city. And there was another prototype which was a trial for universal basic income, which was a fascinating idea. If we look at the degree to which so many jobs are going to be decimated over the coming years, universal basic income is one area which is bringing people together across the political spectrum as one potential solution. So that was an example of visioning and prototyping, and it's obvious from the examples that I've given you that cities really can play a lead role as strategic facilitators of sharing economy and make sure that the benefits of sharing can be widely distributed to as many stakeholders as possible to really promote the benefits of community-based sharing, which is often non-monetised, it's free, and it benefits communities by sharing skills, by getting access to nutritious food, by growing food, by reducing carbon emissions, by creating thicker social connections and so on. And it's also about creating opportunities for local economic development through emerging ownership models like platform cooperatives, which give social entrepreneurs the opportunity to own the platforms that they're utilising for their livelihoods going forward. So thank you very much for your time, and I look forward to the panel conversation afterwards.